And it's not even just that we have to repair, because the oppressions are still happening today, right? This is not this is not 240 years ago problem. This is a problem that is still occurring every day on a daily basis. As, is it Desiree? Desiree noted, just across the street, there is a old monument to lynching that sits on the sculpture garden of the Walker Art Center, which is one of it's in the top 5 most influential modern art museums in the entire world. Like, that is the epitome of culture and the epitome of the ultimate insult on Dakota land to erect a monument to lynching. It's unspeakable. So we're not talking about problems of the past. We're talking about problems that are in existence right now today. And I know many of these other people can say more about how to decolonize than I can, so please.
I was just gonna say, can you hear me? Yes. I was just gonna say that decolonizing looks like getting out of our way when we're trying to build our own tables. It's one thing to invite us to your table to sit at it, but when we sit at your table, we're playing by your rules, by your constructs. When we build our own table, we're setting our own rules and our own constructs. We're not saying that you're not welcome, but get out of our way and stay in your own lane. The other piece is I think about the Confederacy. I was born and raised in New Orleans. I'm very proud of my native city for getting rid of their Confederate monuments. I want you to think about the fact that some of your counterparts, your skin cousins, I'd like to say, your skin cousins think that this is a part of the fabric of American history when it should be nothing but a footnote. The monuments, the statues, the street names, the school names of a wannabe country of rogue states that wanted to subjugate my ancestors for the rest of eternity. We're living in a society that is just not 241 years old. It's actually closer to 600. Our society is almost a millennium old. We've been here in subjugation all of that time in various forms. So when we say to get out of our way, we mean acknowledge your shit. Acknowledge your complicity. Acknowledge the fact that when we decide to do something and you want to help, why is it that you go for the lighter skinned person instead of the darkest with the pretty eyes? Shea butter. Let's think about this for a second. What's palatable to you versus what's actually needed, what needs to be seen? That's what this looks like. We talk a lot about reparations, and the Movement for Black Lives, which is a conglomerate of organizations who came together and created a policy last summer. We've always had that. We just went a little bit deeper. And basically, people were asking, well, they want reparations. No. What reparations means is that we want an equal footing in the political system here to be able to change it. We don't want to be in the system. We were forced into the system. So therefore, because we're born into this and we are American citizens by default, we should have a right to say, hey, our reparations looks like Stop putting all of our children in jail. Stop putting kindergartners on suspension. Stop reprimanding black girls in a way that is so severe that they can't come back from it. That's what reparations looks like. So to answer your question, to unlearn our colonization is to recognize that our ancestors played a role, but also recognize that these are not old problems. They've always been persistent. We've progressed. Some of it has died with each generation, but there's this myth, and I think there are three millennials on the panel, aside from the host. And a lot of times we hear that white millennials are not racist.
You trying to say I'm not a millennial? I'm just trying to clarify right now.
Well, black don't crack. But big sis. But what just to wrap it up is just to say that, people think that as the youth come together from your skin cousin community, that they still maintain these ideals. They just have a lot more usage of their gray matter, and they know how to hide it a little bit better. And they're a little bit more insidious with it. We need to start unlearning those things.
I'll take a crack at it. I think choosing to not buy things so much is one way that you can stop it, a colonial mindset in its tracks. When you are convinced that you need that iPhone because now your screen is cracked and you can just use your phone, and you have to buy or you get a brand new one from whatever their situation is, or when you don't wear your shoes until they are done, or when you don't use things until they are finished and you instead replace them with something new and additional, that is a colonial behavior to endlessly consume. So one of the things that in Standing Rock that was really powerful was there was no money. Well, I should say there was money raised by nonprofits that went places, but there was no money exchange for food. Like if I ever needed a shovel, I would just go and I would take something of equal value, give it to the guy that had the shovel, he would hold on to it, and then later I would get my bag of tamales back, or whatever it is. So freeing yourself from capitalism is one way that folks, if they are not working on their decolonizing in a way that they can connect with, because maybe folks, they don't have access to their family, or whiteness has erased their history, or, it can start with capitalism if you need it to. And I think once you kind of stop that consumption, you stop colonialism, you stop imperialism. And if you don't know the difference between colonialism, imperialism, and how sovereignty plays into that, I would suggest you do some reading. But capitalism, too, is something that is really failing us and is a true expression of colonialism. So my life has changed a lot in terms of, like, I don't live in a teepee, but I don't purchase things anymore. Or if I do, they're secondhand. So that's one way.
Thank you so much. So the next question I have here is, how can fear of the current administration create action that challenges the status quo? And again, that question's to anyone.
What are you scared of? No. Here's the thing. I'll bring up Texas as an example. Every state, including Texas especially, has a bunch of Trumps sitting in office. We had a lot of Donald Trumps before Donald Trump was the president. We tend to forget that, and this is just a regional thing. In Texas, there's an election every year, sometimes twice a year. And people are talking about 2018. 2018, we're going to take over Congress and the Senate, and we're going to get him out of there. But what about your state legislatures and your city councils and your commissioners' courts? civic engagement is extremely important. So this question makes me have a visceral reaction. It almost makes me want to, like, literally just walk into a moving 18-wheeler. Because people are acting like that this was the pinnacle of white supremacy. No. A lot of us like Bill Clinton, but Bill Clinton to me is the person who was the enemy in a sense, because Nixon created the language, Reagan made a policy, Clinton enforced it.
Can I just say, Bill Clinton did the worst thing to black women since slavery. And I was working, you see in my bio, I worked for Hennepin County, administering what became TANF, or the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. At the same time that they were instituting that policy to make black and brown women leave the home and go to work, and only people who get temporary assistance to needy families are mothers with children. So they made them all go to work, and at the very same time they were saying white women should stay at home with their children because children from ages 0 to 5 need their mothers in the home, and they made black women go outside of the home. So destructive. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to
that was needed.
Just throw that in there.
That's called history. You were there when it was happening.
I was
I
right
was a
there.
child when that was happening. I was a child, literally, watching my friends' parents go to jail. I mean, think about this. In the late 80s under Bush 41, people were starting to go to jail. There were shows named Cops. I mean, The 13th, this documentary, you should watch it. Okay? And I mean, a lot of us knew about it before then, but this basically puts it into some serious perspective that institutional and systemic racism has so many different looks that we can't even keep track of it. And we're sitting here scared of a Donald Trump. The man has checks and balances. There's Congress, there's Senate, there's the Supreme Court. Why are we now in 2017 going over a civics lesson that we should all know and remember and have it internalized to where we can hold people accountable? Donald Trump may be able to make executive orders. Congress may make some crazy shit up. They may reverse Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, but the buck stops at your state legislature. In Texas, they've tried to legislate transphobia. They've tried to make it illegal to protest. They want to push a law that makes it a felony that when you step off of the sidewalk into the street to protest, regardless of if you have a permit, you're going to jail. Welcome to Texas. See, here's the thing. Texas, as a state, thinks that they're still a country, but they forgot that they were broken fledgling and they had to be saved by the United States and annexed. Arrogance of whiteness, so to speak. Here's the thing. We're worried about a Trump when we have a man who is disabled who sued his employer because a tree fell on him and is now a governor and made it hard for people to sue for workman's comp. Who is threatening to call a special session to make a bill to attack trans children. Why should a child have to pee in a broom closet? And you're worried about Donald Trump. Why is it a hate crime starting September 17th of 2017 to speak bad about a police officer? There's a hate crime bill that makes speaking out against police, resisting arrest, a hate crime. You're worried about Donald Trump? You're worried about Jeff Sessions? All of these other people? What about the bastard Trumps in your city and in your state and in your county? I really want you to re-examine this.
With that in your families. So the question is repeat the question, just for everybody. I want to go there, but also repeat the question because there's a couple points I wanted to make to that.
So it's how can fear of the current administration create action that challenges the status quo?
So, yeah, we were talking about like why are we scared of Trump? And there are so many other issues. It has mobilized folks. What I've been seeing, particularly in Kansas City, is folks come to the table, they show up at a protest, they show up at a surge meeting, and then when we ask folk to hold their friends, their family members accountable, like show up to those neighborhood association meetings, well, they're a mess. Well, if you ain't gonna be the white person raising hell, who's gonna be that person? Because it sure as hell ain't gonna be me, because I'm already gonna walk in being angry. And I've seen that time and time again with white liberal folk I know, be like, well, those white people are messy, they're a mess. They're the ones that have power. You need to go to your neighborhood association. You need to go to the problematic churches. You need to show up at the city council meetings and raise hell. And guess what? You're probably gonna lose friends. You're gonna lose friends, you're gonna lose social capital, and you're gonna possibly lose money. That is the risk. That is the risk that black and brown folk and queer folk are fighting every damn day of possibly getting fired. Or if I speak out about my former employer, somebody else who is also funding another project, they could let me go. That is the risk I have to take. And so I've seen that time and time again. There was a local school who somebody approached me. It's a whole other story. They basically wanted me to be the Negro whisperer and approached me about doing some work on a board. And I was like, that's not my space. I'm not I work in education, but I'm not an educator. I'm not the best fit. And I was complaining, talking about this. That's a whole other thing. I was complaining about it to a white person, and she was like, oh, well, that's tough. That board is tough. And I was like, there's a community board. Why don't you join it? Well, I don't know if I'll last long. That's nice. Why don't you show up and stick it out? And when things are rough once, continue to go. And so I kind of raised hell with her. I was like, why won't you go? And she was like, okay. So I will give it to her. When I saw her later that night at a surge meeting, she was like, I emailed and I'm going to go to the committee meeting, right? She'll show up. And folks will come to a meeting and they don't like the way it feels, or they don't like action fast enough, right? Like, oh, I want to immediately go out in the streets. But what is the internalized stuff that we have to unpack? As cis folk, as straight folk, as white folk, what is that deep unpacking that we have to do? Because we want to bypass that hard work, and we want to immediately go out and be in solidarity with these communities, bypassing all the internalized shit. And then when we're getting called out on our stuff, we're like, but not me. That's not me. I'm a good person. I was here for you. And then making it about yourself. And one of the things, you know, and this is particular, we've had conversations about white women upholding sexism being within patriarchy and men coddling that. Robin DiAngelo wrote a piece about that. But also, too, the fragility of cis men of color that are doing this work. Like Ashton was talking about, black and brown women are out on the front lines, and our dudes aren't showing up. And when we ask dudes to show up, they'll be like, well, you're not for me. You're not making space for me. No, it's that we don't want leaders. We are leaderful. And we've had many dudes come and approach myself and other people who are doing the work and be like, but what about the men? I'm in the streets fighting for you. What else do you want? When are you going to show up when it's about women's issues or about queer issues, right? So the ways in which that fear of losing the credibility with our peers, I think that is one of the biggest barriers to us doing that, because it's a social club, right? We want to be popular. You're going to be unpopular real quick, and accept that. And I find that's the biggest barrier for folks really doing the work, being outspoken, showing up, and then putting the money behind it. You can have a loud voice all day long, right? But what are you doing to actually make the space, show up, put your money where your mouth is? Because there's a lot of ego in this work, and we've seen it across the board, and it's a constant thing I have to keep doing, like check my ego, check my ego, check my ego. And we have to constantly keep doing it, because if not, we're going to be the only people talking, but then we're not going to create space for other people. So the biggest thing, the fear of Trump, whatever, it's there. The fear of losing credibility in our peer networks is huge. To go to bat for people that don't look like you, I would say that would be the biggest fear.
I would say, is this on? All right. I would say that when we're talking about how can fear of the current administration create action that challenges status quo, first I would ask us to try and reflect on what status quo even means. Like, don't just think about it, reflect on that. What does that entail? What does status quoism mean? I say status quoism, status quoism, whatever. Yes, I do it all the time. We need to find ways to intentionally disrupt status quoism in everyday life and how the many ways in which it impacts daily life. So we're talking about status quoism includes things like misogynoir, rape culture. When we're talking about racism and the various ways that it manifests in everyday life that some people, it's difficult for some people to perceive it as a problem. And many of these things are or were exploited by the current administration, and some people actually applauded it when it came from Trump in the ways in which he exemplified the status quo that exists in the society. So we have to find ways to examine what status quo means and ways we can intentionally try to deconstruct it. And first that takes educating ourselves on the problem, the underlying issues. Because it's easy for us to point to Trump as the problem, when in actuality he's a symptom of issues that have been festering for generations. And these are things just like Diane spoke to earlier this morning. These things we have been talking about and speaking out against for generations. I've seen many articles written way before there was a Trump that speaks to these very same issues. I can remember literature that I've read from, for example, James Baldwin. He speaks to these same issues in almost a prophetic way, and they have come to pass, and they continue to come to pass. It's not like Trump arose from the ether. I mean, he is a symptom of some issues that we need to seriously find a way to intentionally recognize. And this starts with ourselves. We can't continue to point at, oh, well, it's the right. It's the right wing, etc. Whatever excuse we try to come up with. We need to find ways, and they do have issues, obviously, but we also have to find out how we are complicit with, how we participate in, how we encourage status quoism, and what that looks like. And so that takes learning from those who have been speaking about these things, those who live under and have to endure certain forms of oppressive social oppression. So it really takes a consistent desire. It takes a desire and consistency to find ways to unlearn and unpack these habits that have become established and that they're lodged deep within the cultural imagination. And these are things that we all participate in, whether we understand it or whether we see it or not. So that's something that we really have to have internal dialogue with and to outwardly find ways to get active insofar as seeking out learning tools, and we'll discuss that a little bit later, I think, and learning from others. So, for example, Ashton, he has a platform that you can follow on social media. So does everyone else here. They have a social media platform. You follow various people. We all use social media. Well, many of us use social media. You can follow them in their everyday musings about these issues. You can read from certain authors. You can read from certain people who write essays, like Ijeoma Oluo. I'm going to speak about her later on. But there's definitely ways that we can work to examine ourselves and our place within society and the ways we perpetuate these issues.
Yeah, you know, I guess I just wanted to kind of speak a little bit to the question as well. And I mean, we have seen that, and I agree with all the panelists, clearly the issues that are coming to a head with this 45th administration have been present for a very long time. I think what the opportunity, if you will, is that now these oppressions are being spread out amongst the masses. And so for white women, for all the upholding of white supremacy, now they're being attacked, right? Planned Parenthood is under attack. A woman's right to choose. I just read about a situation in a state where women have to get permission to have an abortion if it's causing physical harm, if the pregnancy is causing physical harm, because of some anti-abortion bill that has been enacted. You know, so the poor white men who live in Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, who are the reason why 45 is elected, at least that's what they want us to believe, right? But I am clear that all of these corporate 500 executives who have very good jobs and very good homes, they voted for him. You know, all the police officers, they voted for him. All the firefighters, medical doctors, all the way down the list. So that they are now, based on the budgets and the sort of policy proposals that are coming forward, they're going to suffer tremendously. You know, it was the biggest con game, and I think that people will see that, and we will become more engaged in our local politics, in our local communities and civic organizations to make some changes on the local level. So, I mean, that's the only positive that I can come to in this age of fear. Yeah.
I tend not to ask permission for anything. I don't wait for permission. I just do it. And if I'm scared of something, I still just do it because I'm stubborn. And I think with women, a lot of times we wait for that permission. We wait to be asked. We just wait all the time. Wait for permission. And to break free of that is one way to address your fear and get past it, is to acknowledge when you are feeling it, but not get wrapped up in it and paralyzed. You know, I kind of think of it, because in my day job, you know, I go to those front lines where police are attacking people. You know, when police show up, just like probably with everybody on this panel, I don't know if I'm safe or if I'm more in danger when the police show up. So the way that I deal with fear is I think of fear like I'm looking at a highway with a bunch of cars on it, and each one of those cars is an emotion. And I allow myself to like acknowledge that I am feeling that, and then watch the car drive away. And I'm like removed from it, and that allows me to act. So if you can not get all up in your feelings, and you know, it makes things a lot easier, because your feelings are the things that mess you up. So getting right with your feelings, and especially if you're white, your like fragility, because being raised in a society, it's like, oh my God, you have to be coddled, everything, like, are you okay? That makes it really hard to break free from fear, because you've been conditioned then into that fear that you're not going to be okay because of patriarchy. It's like, you are not going to be okay. So I'm stubborn, and removing yourself out of your feelings will help you stare, death in the face sometimes,